Russia is experiencing the largest, quietest, and deadliest collapse of internal security in its modern history. When you call emergency security lines, in Moscow, there may be a deep silence. On the other end of the line, now look very closely at the images you see on the screen. This is Lubry, Moscow, Oblast, a masked military camouflaged. Organized group, approximately 140 people. These are not Russia's official police. They are not law enforcement. They are an ultra-radical, paramilitary group calling themselves the Russian community, Russkaya Obchina. So what are they doing on the streets of Moscow? They are patrolling. According to their claims, they are hunting down immigrant crimes and illegal immigrants. Now, let's look at the sad reality of Putin's Russia in the fall of 2025 with these news headlines appearing on the screen. On October 25th, another massive street riot involving more than 80 migrants took place in Moscow's Prochino district. That day, that showcase was shattered. The Moscow Times reported a mass brawl among migrant groups in the heart of Moscow. Reports describe a horrific street fight involving knives and cutting tools. The images were so horrific that even Russian media had to censor them. This is not a medieval film. It is an event that took place in the capital of Putin's stable Russia. According to reports, 19 people face up to 7 years in prison. This is where state authority has collapsed, where the law has ended. This was a civil war that erupted in Moscow. So it was Putin's famous police force while the capital streets descended into chaos. This is where the second act of the nightmare begins. The police couldn't stop this chaos because there is a massive police shortage of 200,000 officers. These are not people who have gone on strike. These are ghost positions vacated by those who have resigned and never been replaced. And this number is not static. It is spreading like a virus, doubling every month. In metropolises like Moscow and St. Petersburg, 66% of those critical police stations that interact with the public now have no chief, no authority, no state to maintain order. And at this very moment of disappearance, in that dark void where the state has withdrawn from the streets, Vladimir Putin played the biggest gamble in history instead of repairing Russia's security. By signing the 2026 budget, Putin chose to burn the country's lifeblood, a full $166 billion on the Ukrainian front. According to official data and leaked reports, the police shortage across Russia has exceeded 152,000, and independent sources indicate that this number is closer to 200,000. Where did this massive void emerge? The generals sitting in their cozy offices at the Kremlin remain in place. The elite remain in place. The void has formed precisely where you, and ordinary Russian citizens live. On the streets, in the neighborhoods, at the metro exits. So, how did a regime that has remained in power for 25 years, with its strong Russia propaganda, end up unable to protect its own capital? To understand this collapse, we need to examine the panic behind the Kremlin's closed doors and the shocking reports placed on the table. We are not saying that Russia is collapsing. Neither the CIA nor MI6 are saying this. It is being said by none other than Alexander Karachev, the head of the Presidential Directorate for Monitoring and Analysis of Social Processes, considered the brain of the Kremlin, appointed by Vladimir Putin himself. In the report titled "Who Are We Prepared?" and leaked by Karachev and his team and supported by Russian Presidential Academy, the Kremlin regime confessed its greatest fear for the first time in such a clear and frightening way: civil war. This report is not just an academic study. It is the last SOS call from the captain's bridge of a sinking ship. Karachev lists 5 major deadly threats facing Russia, placing collapse of the political system and risk of civil conflict at the top of the list. The Kremlin's own sociologist reports on the dehumanization of Russian society and the breakdown of trust between the state and the people. So, theoretically, how does this erosion of authority described in the report translate into reality on the ground on Moscow's cold asphalt? This is where we encounter the biggest security scandal in modern Russian history, the evaporation of the police force. According to official data and leaked reports, the personnel shortage within the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD, has already exceeded 172,000, and independent observers confirm that this figure is actually closer to 200,000. However, the real disaster lies not in the quantity of this shortage, but in its quality. This void is not in the protected offices of the Kremlin or the headquarters of generals. The upper echelons remain intact. The collapse is happening right where you and I, ordinary citizens, live on the streets, in the neighborhoods, at the subway, exits, particularly at the critical level we call district police chiefs or neighborhood commissioners, who are the first point of contact with crime and the first face of the state for the public. The vacancy rate has reached an unbelievable level of 66%. Please think about this rate for a second. 66%. Mathematically, this means that an institution has become dysfunctional. This means that 2 out of every 3 district police stations in Russia are effectively headless, with no authorized officer to answer phone and no patrol team that can be organized to go to the scene. Just last month, in a single month, another 5,000 police officers resigned. This is not a normal staff turnover rate. It is the speed of a panicked escape from a burning building. This is not the speed of leaving an institution. It is the speed of fleeing a burning building. And this exodus is not geographically balanced. In some towns in Siberia, the Far East, and even in some suburbs of Moscow, the police force has effectively shut down, closed its doors. The state is physically withdrawing from those regions. The laws of the Russian Federation no longer apply there. There are only local powers, organized crime, groups, or utter nothingness. We call this the war consuming the civil state. So where are these police officers going? Why does no one want to be Putin's police? The answer lies in the vicious cycle of the war economy that Putin himself created and that Karachev describes as impending catastrophe. We call this economic cannibalism. By signing the 2026 budget, Putin allocated $166 billion, approximately 13.5 trillion rubles, to invade Ukraine. This is 1/3 of Russia's total budget and the largest military expenditure seen since the Soviet era. However, Putin ate the police to feed the army. The war economy inflated the civilian sector so disproportionately that civil service became synonymous with poverty. Today, a police officer in Moscow, risking their life and working under the threat of terrorism, earns an average monthly salary of 40,000 to 70,000 rubles. But just across the street, a courier or taxi driver who takes no risks, merely delivering pizza, can earn 150,000 rubles a month due to the labor shortage created by the war. The equation is simple and brutal. Why would a young Russian throw himself in front of bullets for 50,000 rubles? But there is an even more tragic comic, even more chilling dimension to the situation. Their greatest anger is directed at the army, Putin's new darling. Putin is offering astronomical sums to those who join the army in order to find soldiers for the Ukrainian meat grinder, a Contract soldier salary starts at 200,000 rubles. With signing bonuses and other incentives, it can reach 3 to 4 million rubles in some regions. A police officer sitting at his desk at the station sees his colleague at the next desk resign and join the army, earning in one signature what he would earn in a year. Police officers feel like the state's stepchildren, and this feeling is not just an economic disappointment. This feeling causes a very deep, very dangerous psychological disconnect. The evaporation of the police force is not just a bureaucratic statistic. It is the first domino in a massive domino effect that activates the fault lines of Russian society. When the state withdraws from the streets, that void is never left empty. History and physics tell us the same thing. A vacuum of authority is always filled by violence and chaos. This is exactly what is happening in Moscow and St. Petersburg right now as the police force Eridus. Moscow's demographic structure is turning into a ticking time bomb ready to explode, to fill the labor gap created by the hundreds of thousands of Russian men sent to the front lines of the war where they died or were maimed. The Kremlin brought hundreds of thousands of people from Central Asia, Africa, and the former Soviet republics into the country as cheap labor. Moscow's suburbs filled with uncontrolled ghettoized neighborhoods, governed by their own rules. However, the state mind and police force needed to integrate, control, or manage potential tensions with this new population no longer exist. With 66% of police stations leaderless, these areas have effectively become no-go zones. This situation triggered the rehearsal of the Civil War scenario warned about in Karachev report. With no state authority, the darkest elements of Russian society sprang into action. Vigilante groups emerged on the streets, masked altruist gangs dispensing their own justice. Armed with sticks and knives, they hunt for immigrants at subway exits, demanding identification, and carrying out summary executions and beatings. On the other side, immigrant groups left defenseless and unable to obtain protection from the state are rapidly arming themselves by forming their own self-defense units. Moscow is boiling. This is no longer a simple law, an order problem, or a wave of petty crime. These are the footsteps of an ethnic and class-based internal conflict, an urban guerrilla war in the heart of Moscow. Moreover, this chaotic environment has also blinded Russia's internal intelligence capabilities, the field intelligence needed to prevent terrorist attacks and identify safe houses was gathered thanks to those neighborhood commissioners. Now those commissioners are gone. The state's eyes and ears have been ripped out. Tragedies like the Crocus City Hall attack were just a glimpse of how deadly this blindness could be. Now, with 200,000 police officers missing, Moscow is completely exposed to all kinds of provocation, sabotage, and internal unrest. Consider this. On one side, news of thousands of soldiers dying every day at the front. On the other, a population crushed by inflation, and now a state that cannot ensure security on its own streets. For the Russian people, the security contract has now been torn up. A Russian citizen lives in a country where the probability of the police not coming is higher than the probability of them coming when they call. This is the psychological collapse of the concept of state. What Karachev calls a collapse of the political system begins not when the Kremlin walls come down, but when citizens can no longer reach the police. And that moment is happening now. Russia's internal front is collapsing, rotting from within, not because of Ukraine's drone attacks, but because of the Kremlin's own negligence and economic cannibalism. This police crisis and street chaos is more than a tactical failure. It is a strategic checkmate position that shows the fundamental failure of Vladimir Putin's 25-year power strategy. Putin's promise to make Russia a stable and secure harbor has been crushed by his own war machine. Let's focus on the most disgusting and revealing detail in Karachev's report. The Kremlin sociologist not only warns of civil war, but also exposes a mentality of the Russian elite, the oligarchs and bureaucrats who reap the regime's spoils. According to the report, the Russian elite is currently focused solely on sending their children abroad, moving their assets out of the country, and securing their retirement in the West or in safe havens. This is the greatest rats abandoning ship scenario in history. Putin is trying to sell the war to his people as a purification, a cleansing of Russia from traitors, and a process of patriotic awakening. Karachev even suggests I have lots of children, propaganda campaign, and patriotic education to counter the impending population crisis. But the report's subtext screams the truth. While your children are dying on the front lines or working as couriers because their police salaries aren't enough, Putin's elite are securing their accounts in London and Dubai. This is not purification. This is decay. The warning from Ukrainian intelligence chief Oleg Ivashenko confirms this decay with economic data. Russia's national wealth fund has shrunk to $38 billion. When the money runs out, the fake loyalty of those elites will also end. A state that cannot pay police salaries cannot buy loyalty. This internal collapse and weakness is now clearly visible from the outside, even by Putin's closest allies. In diplomacy, body language sometimes speaks louder than official statements. The attitude of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Putin's most loyal, perhaps only friend in Europe, during their last meeting was proof of how the Kremlin's charisma has been destroyed. His cold, distant, and reluctant attitude toward Putin in front of the cameras, the sour expression on his face, even Orbán now sees it appearing. Alongside Putin comes at a political cost that the Kremlin is no longer an invincible power and that the ship is taking on water. Even as allies understand that the strong leader myth has given way to the reality of a helpless and lonely man. Ultimately, Putin's strategy was to turn Russia into a fortress. However, at this point, while the outer walls of the fortress, the army, have been reinforced, the inner pillars, the police, social peace, elite loyalty have been completely left to rot. $166 billion may prolong the war on the front lines for another year, but it cannot bring back the empty police stations, the angry crowds, and the fleeing elites on the streets of Moscow. Russia, before being invaded by the Ukrainian army, is in danger of being swallowed up by its own security vacuum. The answer to Karachev's question, who are we, is now very clear. Russia is an organism whose body, the army, is still trying to run, but whose brain state, authority, is already dead. Vladimir Putin, in his quest to invade Ukraine, has left his own capital open to invasion by signing that 2026 budget, burying $166 billion in a frontline fantasy. He surrendered the streets of Moscow to the harshest reality, to chaos. Russia's own sociologist admits that the state's civilization code has been broken, and that civil war is at the door. When a state lists civil war as its number one threat in its own official reports, that war has already begun in people's minds. The 200,000 vacant police positions in Moscow, the silence in the police stations, are the clearest signs of the approaching storm. Putin's strong state is now nothing more than a hollow, rotten shell that crumbles at the slightest touch. And When that shell breaks, the chaos that emerges will be far more destructive than the war in Ukraine, because the enemy is no longer at the door. The enemy is in those empty streets the state has abandoned. There is no safe place left in Russia. The state has abandoned the building. While Putin was trying to gain territory in Ukraine, he lost Russia. And Russia is no longer a state. Russia is now a lawless, ungoverned region with nuclear weapons. And there is only one rule for survival in this region. Might makes right. So, what are your thoughts on this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications.